contracts civil procedure crossover question from the summer of 1984 is another interesting and fairly straightforward fact pattern. It also pleases me to talk about it because this was not only the lowest pass rate from any summer bar exam in recent history, about 41%, it also happens to be the bar exam that I took in California and the one that got me into the ranks of California lawyers. And a good thing I didn't have to take the February '85 exam. That's how I feel about it even now. Let's look at the call of the question. 1. Does the State X Court have jurisdiction to grant the relief requested? Discuss. Well, that's a very interesting question. It looks like a Civ Pro question and a remedies question at the same time. And you know what? It is. Next, question 2. What other issues should Fred raise in defending the action, and how should the court rule on each of them? Discuss. Well, we already know that the plaintiff is going to have a theory of liability before the defendant is able to interpose any defenses. So we are mindful both of civil procedure and of either torts or contracts or, as it turns out, real property. And this is a question that really could be called a contracts real property remedies civil procedure crossover question. So I think that although this is one of the oldest questions that I'm using in the Master Essay Method course, this still is a modern and timely question because from before 1984 until after 2010, we have seen essay questions that have multiple subjects involved, even if they are not all directly being tested. Please go to paragraph 1 and let's have a look at this fact pattern together. We meet Fred, our defendant, in paragraph 1. He owns Fieldacre, a farm and residence in State F. That's worth $200,000. Sam is Fred's son. He owns Snowacre in a different state, State S. It's valued at $25,000, drastically less than the value of Fieldacre. In fact, 1/8 the value. In paragraph 2, Fred asks Sam if Snowacre has access to water. Sam says he believes there is an underground water source which could be developed. Fred said that, in such event, he could use Snowacre to pasture cattle and that he wanted Sam to have Fieldacre so Sam could raise Fred's grandchildren on a farm. So it looks as if this transfer between Fred and Sam is in offing. In paragraph 3, we see the offer. On May 1, '84, Fred offers in writing to deliver Sam a deed to Fieldacre in exchange for Sam's delivery to Fred of a deed to Snowacre. The offer concluded with the statement, "This offer will remain open until June 1, '84, and it was signed by Fred. On May 10, '84, Sam refused an offer from Rob to purchase Snowacre for $35,000. On May 25, '84, Fred withdrew the offer he had made to Sam, stating that he had discovered there was no water source available on Snowacre. Well, stop right there. It looks as if the offer that Fred made on May 1 was freely revocable at will. So this May 25 revocation should be valid, unless Sam's act of reliance on May 10 will be enough to bind Fred. But move on. On May 28, '84, Sam delivered to Fred a written acceptance of the offer together with a deed conveying Snowacre. And then, to show great family values, the son sues the dad in State X, alleging a contract for the exchange of Snowacre for Fieldacre and his timely delivery of the deed to Snowacre to Fred. He wants specific performance. Fred has made a general appearance in the State S action. Well, that makes the first call of the question pretty easy, doesn't it? Fred already has made a general appearance, so he has stipulated to personal jurisdiction. There's got to be something more complicated going on, and, as a matter of fact, there is. We've got to look carefully. Look at the first call of the question. Does the State S court have jurisdiction to grant the relief requested? Discuss. Well, that's a very interesting question. Even if we submit for a moment that Fred has submitted to personal jurisdiction, the State S court does not have in rem jurisdiction over Fieldacre. So we're going to have to be a little bit nimble in our analysis. So we again see the two calls of the question. Now, take a look at the outline of issues that I present, and I think you'll see, again, this is yet another example of a fact pattern that you are likely to pass or fail before you even write one word. This is a question that requires a fair amount of thinking, and it requires careful organization if you want to finish on time. So, first we answer the question about whether or not the state S court has jurisdiction. I've got two sections. First, the jurisdiction issue over Fred. This is where we find a home for his general appearance. Then we sharply pose the question, does the state court have jurisdiction to order specific performance with regard to Fieldacre? And the answer, ultimately, is yes. There's no in rem jurisdiction over Fieldacre, but the state S court could obtain specific performance, could order specific performance with its contempt power within state S, or Sam can sue just to enforce the judgment in state F and get full faith and credit. So this is actually a little bit of an enforcement of judgments question, and thus even more worthy of our interest. Then, in our answer to the second call of the question, the other defenses that Fred may have, well, he's got a couple of different defenses to contract liability. First, that he withdrew the offer, and secondly, that there was no consideration, and thirdly, that there was a mistake. Now, as it turns out, I find the mutual material mistake by itself to be grounds for invalidating this agreement. And even if it is not, I find it to be grounds for not allowing specific performance. And here we go through the typical elements of equitable relief in contracts. So, once again, we see a question here that basically is a contracts, property, remedies, civil procedure, crossover question. Now, please turn to the answer, and let's carefully review it together for a moment or two. Look at the very first paragraph that I write. I lead with the facts. I indicate that we've got a specific performance action in contracts, and that the contract is governed by the common law. Next, we turn to the jurisdiction issues, establishing personal jurisdiction over Fred, which is easy because he submitted to it. So going through a whole analysis about minimum contacts would be unreasonable and unnecessary. If you could do it and still have time, you probably wouldn't hurt yourself. But if you wrote about minimum contacts at the expense of other issues that are present, that's how you could hurt yourself pretty seriously. So you'll see I even indicate that it isn't necessary to consider minimum contacts within the body of my analysis. Next, we turn to the court's jurisdiction to order specific performance, and even though it lacks in rem jurisdiction, it can enforce its equitable orders by having a contempt citation. Right locally in State S, or the plaintiff can file for enforcement of judgment in State F. And the bottom line is, to answer the question, the State S court does have jurisdiction. Next, we move on to what I consider to be the more complicated issues presented here, the contracts issues. And it's an interesting question because not only is it framed around the defenses, but the defenses are a little tricky, and you've got to be careful to spot all of them. You'll notice that I basically do an ordinary contracts analysis. I begin with offer and acceptance, and I focus on the potential detrimental reliance. Next, we turn to consideration, and this is the most subtle issue, and the one you could leave out and still get a passing score. But this issue, whether or not the contract had consideration, was definitely worth points for those who came up with it. And although this is not really a consideration question, the great disparity in value between the two properties raises an issue about consideration. Now, as you'll see in my analysis, because Snowacre is worth $25,000, I think that is not an insignificant amount of money, even though it's only an eighth the value of Fieldacre. So I conclude that there is no failure of consideration that might defeat the existence of this contract. But then we turn to mistake, and I think mistake is a complete defense to liability under this contract, because we know from the very beginning that Fred was concerned about access to water on Snowacre. And if there's no water, Snowacre is useless to Fred. And I recite the facts, and I point out the central fact, which is that access to water is the whole reason that Fred was interested in acquiring Snowacre in the first place. So it's obviously a material mistake, and I think it's good enough for Fred to get out of the contract altogether. Then we turn to specific performance, and so even if we find that there was a binding agreement, we still have to go through the analysis to determine whether or not an equitable order will issue. Certainly, the legal remedies are inadequate because land is unique. That's a basic idea in specific performance that we learned in the first year of law school. There's certainly a definite and certain contract. Also, there's no issue really about feasibility or mutuality of remedy. And then the core defense is mistake. Mutual mistake is good enough to defeat an equitable order, and I also spent a fair amount of time on hardship. Here, the defense is really more appropriate under different facts. But still, this hardship issue is yet another issue, another reason why a court sitting in equity, even a court sympathetic to Sam, would likely conclude that Sam's effort to obtain a specific performance order should fail. And I think the correct answer is that the contract ought to be invalidated based on mutual mistake. And that concludes an analysis of a fairly elderly, but still absolutely timely crossover question.